Hey, good morning. Sorry, I'm a minute late. I had to be, I was a little bit like running through the building trying to get set up for this morning and realized, oh my gosh, where did the time go? So we're going to let a few of you begin to jump on board for this kind of live moment that we share. But I did want to say this morning as we get rolling is, whether you've arrived here for the kind of live experience that we share collectively and have this opportunity to collaborate by kind of providing some of our shared wisdom together through the various posts that we put up, or whether you've come a little bit later to the game and are just watching it as a recording. Um, Given where we're at in our culture and in our time, I just think it's so awesome that we're here together. Um, I need it, frankly. You need it. We all need it. This is going to be just this sort of ongoing conversation, I think, that we have to have as people around the planet, and finding ways to do it despite our social distancing, or at least our physical distancing. Let's not social distance. Let's physically distance from each other to be safe, but let's stay connected the best we can. So this is just such a great vehicle to do that. Yeah, nice shout outs this morning. Say hi to each other. Let's get that kind of community vibe going this morning. A few emoticons to brighten up our day. Clearly, it's already a hot one, and I've chosen to place myself outdoors today. And just on this side of me, I know it's kind of reversed for you, is the chapel of our church. And I wanted to position myself this morning kind of in between two spaces. The one is this chapel space, a sort of sacred space that so many of the religious people who are part of this community of faith that I've been a part of for so long, kind of see as their sort of spiritual hub. That space, all of that energy in those rooms on the other side of that wall have held a history of spiritual reflection, of a teaching, of weddings and funerals and baptisms and moments. It's all in there. It's all in there. And then there's this, right? Um, a bit like the wilderness, you know, the open space, the great outdoors, the energy of the cosmos, where many of us now are finding our spiritual way is no longer in these spaces, maybe momentarily, but maybe it could be a pattern that transforms the way we think about how we do religion together. Clearly, we are in this in between time of moving between spaces that were familiar and moving into territory that is um, more open. I'm not sure if it's unknown. I think deeply we know our relationship with this um, birth mother that's held us, but I think we're re-engaging it in a new way. So it feels like open space to us. I was talking to a colleague, I think just yesterday, and he was commenting how he really appreciates the way in which we do these things in a different location every time. A little bit like Jesus, who was always doing, kind of wisdom teaching on the fly, whether he be standing in a boat on the Sea of Galilee or walking down the road or, sitting by a well. Clearly, if you want to justify this hopping around, you only have to look to our Lord and Savior to know that he did the same thing. So I'm feeling like I'm in good company. So every week I try to pick a different location that sort of captures the spirit of the content that we want to explore together. So hopefully you get the vibe this morning. In addition, off my shoulder here are kind of the props for today. It's two bricks to represent kind of brick walls. These places that feel unpenetrable. Is that a right word? Things we can't seem to push against. It feels like a brick wall. It's so heavy, so solid. We know there's no moving through it. I have two of those today that I want to make reference to. And then in the middle is a candle. And today, if you're going to light your candle, I want you to imagine it between these two forces. Because I think what I'm going to challenge us today and what I'm reflecting on this week is kind of the third way through, or a third way in, or just a third way. Is there something that can possibly invite us more fully into future? And I think there is. And I think we can see it through some of our spiritual heroes that we pay attention to. And I want to focus in on that today. So I'm going to light the candle today and take just a brief moment of pause. I would invite you to either light a candle or just kind of center yourself today, whether you're be sitting outdoors or in your office or having your cup of coffee, wherever you're at. Just kind of sink into this time together so we can be present for each other for the next 30, 40 minutes, and allow the image of the candle to in some ways be the representation of your own deep inner spirit or soul or presence or energy that you want to bring not only to this moment, but to the way forward as well. And I invite you to take a couple of cleansing breaths, maybe just to feel the weight of your own belly, that middle of yourself, that center of yourself, that place that opens and closes with the gift of each new breath. A center that is filled with the refreshing power of oxygen that moves through your bloodstream and invigorates your body. That is, in some ways, your soulful place. And I invite you to arrive there this morning. So welcome. Before I get rolling on the kind of the theme for today, I'm already rolling on the theme for the day, but before I really get rolling, I wanted to think for a moment about kind of the changing shape of religion. It's something I think about all the time. I was talking to some friends last night, and we kind of had that conversation for a while too. I think the character of the religious experience seems to be in some transition. It has been transitioning for some time, but I think it's in like hyper transition mode at the moment. And in some ways, religion is kind of finding again its capacity to birth itself in this kind of ever-changing context in which we find ourselves, right? Because we've been thrust out of the patterns of maintaining traditional religious piety, and we're all now kind of in this space, right? We're realizing the capacity of religion to be this kind of conversational partner that allows us to integrate all the energy and the complexity, the pain, the joy, the hope. These days, maybe some of the violence and the disruption, to be able to integrate those into our understanding of life more fully, so that we can kind of create a soulful response, a language to engage it, a grounding place in order to orient ourselves as we're engaged in it, right? All of that is the new religious frontier in my mind. And it's partly the reason why I've pulled away from trying to replicate out in the new space that we're, forced to be in together collectively. I've kind of decided not to try to replicate old patterns out here, but to explore with you and to explore myself what it looks like to do religion in that way. And I'll argue today that I think the spiritual heroes that we sort of hold up, we even attribute to them divine status, were ones that did exactly that, right? They I wouldn't say they rejected their religious tradition, but they took the beauty of the religious tradition that they inherited, and they lived it fully in this context that they found themselves in, and then a whole new language and understanding and metaphors and practices emerged out from that conversation with the reality that they faced. And what I'm asking you to do, really, if you're paying attention to this, and what I'm asking of myself is let's try while we're forced into this mode, let's try to do religion that way. Right? Let's try to do religion that way. And this Sunday morning is my attempt every week to just do that with you. Because I'm in the same boat as you are. I don't spend my time in there anymore. I spend all my time here. And then this is my new sacred conversation. I know you're probably the same way, right? I know you're probably the same way. In some ways, it reminded me of a piece of poetry that I want to use to kind of launch this this morning. It's called Lake Song. And this is just an excerpt from this piece of poetry written by Colette Inez. And I love this piece because it reminds us that our names, our identities in some ways, are forever changing. And it does so by linking that change to the stones that are constantly being rolled over and over again by the waves at the shoreline, and the birds that sing their song overhead. How do we continue to find ourselves into our unfurling identity as we engage the context in which we find ourselves? I think this poem is a beautiful way to frame it. I'm going to use this poem today and as sort of our prayerful, meditative piece, and then I'll close with it as well. Lake Song. Every day our name is changed, say stones colliding into waves. Go and read our names on the shore, say waves colliding into stones. And the birds over water, they call their names to each other again and again to say where they are. So where have you been, my small bird? I know our names will change one day. But before our shadows disappear into a starry blur, call out your name to say where we are. Call out your name to say where we are. Isn't that a beautiful little piece of poetry? I'll try to post that up so that you can read the full poem and kind of hold on to it. Today, I would encourage you to think about the way in which you both get in touch with the soulful engagement you're having with all that's going on in the world, and then to feel how it's transforming or changing your identity, and then, like the stones rolling over in the waves, to speak your name again and again and again, so we know together, where we are. It's an awesome. I want to stop there. I was like, what was that? We've been together 15 minutes. I'm ready to go home. I mean, that's just a really good stuff. All right. Good? You good? Okay. I wanted to, this has been another crazy week. It's like every week seems to get crazier and crazier. As you well know, Lori and I had to stop our vacation shed a little bit short because the virus was beginning to rage, given our efforts at reopening. Maybe too quickly, but maybe opening was the right thing to do, of course. But we rushed in ways that made us more susceptible. And like a wildfire looking for tinder, the virus, of course, is just exploding on the scene. And it's causing us all to realize that, hey, wait a minute, I thought, we're like moving into a new phase of our relationship with this thing, and with all of the secondary layers of cultural awareness that have emerged around this thing. And that is, we thought, well, we'll get over this. I mean, it'll go away. Maybe we were all a little bit like our president saying, maybe when it gets to be summer, we'll be over the hump. And so there was this first phase of the experience of what we were having to go through, right? That felt like, hey, let's buck up and let's all be in this together. And there was a good spirit in the land. And even David Brooks was kind of in his commentary saying, I really feel like Americans have kind of bounded together, right? Despite all of our differences, we're like, we can do this thing. And then we got a little bit tired, right? Fatigue, viral fatigue began to set in. We're like, really, we got to keep this thing up. And this idea of being able to loosen up and get back out again felt really good to us. And then now here we are again. And we're like, whoa, this is not, it doesn't feel like it's a little blip. It feels more like a mountain that we have to climb, traverse, journey through, get around. It feels big, right? And then this last week, as people, I think, are kind of entering into that degree of fatigue, both in relationship to the virus, as you see people, protesting and refusing to cooperate with protective measures that would keep their community, a little bit more safe or soften the spread so that we can manage it better, right? People started reacting negatively. And then the news reports about the gun violence. I mean, the people is kind of violently reacting out is like abhorrent. We're like, what is going on? And then people, very particularly white people, right, very, very like starting to rise up and push back against all the things that are coming up around Black Lives Matter. You can just feel that energy as well, and you get this sense that we're moving into this phase that feels more volatile. More angry. I feel more threatened by it in some ways, right? And what I wanted to explore today a little bit is the kind of how do we move as people who pay attention to the energy of our personal and collective soul. How do we move into this kind of phase without resorting to kind of that the most ancient part of our brain that triggers fight or flight, which is what I'm witnessing a little bit these days and feeling a little bit inside of myself, right? This, I don't know about you. You could maybe post what you are in general, but I'm more of a flight guy than a fight guy. I will tell you, I tried fight twice, and it was so humiliating and unnerving and scary that I'm like, I'm not going to do fight in my reaction to threat. That just doesn't work for me. But man, do I do flight well. I have a propensity to just, close down, run away, and go to some space that I can crawl into, whether it be depression or maybe a cocktail or Netflix. I'm a flight guy. And so I run away from the problem. And I will tell you that those are natural responses. Fight or flight are natural responses. I think they're going to come up more and more. I think that as things get even more serious, potentially, or as we face resource challenges with climate change and huge populations start shifting, and the future looks like there will be a lot of moments when our cultural norms feel like they're being threatened. And we are going to have this sort of, the limbic system. We're just going to have something that triggers us to either fight back or run away. And I will tell you, this is my sense anyway, that both of those are like a brick wall. Ultimately, they will get you nowhere. The violence or the fight part, it would just agitate the situation. That doesn't mean that anger isn't justified, but when it resorts to just all-out violence, that's going to lead to nowhere. That, to me, feels like a brick wall. Flight, running and hiding like I do, that's going to get you. It's going to lead to nowhere. Those two things are like short-term responses that might feel like the right thing to do at the moment, but they're not going to be the things that allows us to move into the level of creativity, spirituality, soulfulness, wisdom that's going to allow us to kind of move into new territory together, to be truly, like we talked about, to be truly religious. So the question is, you don't have to agree with me about fight or flight. You might think, well, I fight my way through everything. It works pretty good. So I could be wrong, but I think I'm right because I'm the only one talking right now. Um, so the question is, in my mind, is there a third way? Is there a third way that can move you through what appear to be these kind of places where we run into this brick wall? Violence, in my opinion, will have us running into a brick wall. Flight will have us running into a brick wall. What's a way through this? In many ways, it reminds me of, that scene at the end of the Gospels. If you read those things about Jesus' life, he run towards the end. The disciples have moved into flight mode, right? They're locked. They're locked in a closed room. The doors are locked. There's no way in and there's no way out. And Jesus, after his death, goes through closed doors, right? Moves through the solid wall and appears before them. And they're like, wait a minute. I think the metaphor is they recognize that this Jesus way of life could be the third way that can move them through these barriers to responses that get us nowhere. You can't just stay holed up. You can't just fight the system violently. There's got to be a third way. So what might that look like? I don't think you have to look very far to figure that out. Clearly, a lot of our spiritual heroes are models of that. And I think we, as people who have paid attention to those spiritual heroes, can use the way in which they engage their world in their context as a way to think about how we can engage our own, right? Let's take Moses, a Hebrew figure. You know the story of Moses pretty well. If you don't, Google it. And Moses did both fight and flight. Think about it, right? The first response Moses had to the injustices that were exploding around him in Egypt, and he was growing in his awareness of that great explosion of injustice, particularly against his own kind, got extremely violent and took the life of an Egyptian. Right? He went out and he killed somebody. And my guess is he recoiled after that. He realized this is going to get me nowhere. And so Moses fled. He went to flight mode. He left Egypt and hid. And out in the hidden places is when he discovers that there's got to be another way. And if you think about it, he finds his voice. And and we've talked about this, and he goes back into Egypt and begins to engage the powers that be in a pursuit for freedom for his people, to find not the answer, but the opportunity to explore a new frontier collectively as a people, what we think of as the wilderness years, right? So that they might engage world in a way that they can find a more just way to live. That's what Moses, that's the beauty of the great spiritual hero of Moses, right? Fight didn't work. Flight didn't work. He had this other way to engage. And he had to find courage. He had to find voice. He had to find language, so he got Aaron to go with him. He had to stay connected in some way to this sacred bond he had, to the way in which he understood God or the divine. And it wasn't without complications. It wasn't without risk. But Moses realized that he had to do that. That, to me, is what is the great challenge of religion for our time, is we have to be people of the third way. Right, and to nurture the places within us that kind of allow for a third way response other than let's all fight each other. And that could get real in some ways. I don't want to scare anybody, but it feels like that. That could get very real. I don't want to fight anybody, and we don't want to run away from the problem. We gotta be able to guide our way through this, and that requires, I think, a degree of resources and depth and centering and courage. Like Paul Tillich used to say, have the courage to be. That's the religious work that happens out here right now, right? This one was more about like hanging out with the like-minded, and that's fine, it's great, but we just can't do that anymore, right? You can't come sit in a pew, you can't come sing the hymns you used to sing, you can't come and gather with the like-minded and give them a hug anymore. You're engaged in a world that is really, really, really in a vibrant place right now, with all the pros and cons of that. Second spiritual hero that I'll pick for today is, of course, Jesus, which we have obviously collectively, for many of us, elevated to a point of giving him divine status because we thought that his third way was like the way. I don't know that I would go that far, but clearly it gives us some wisdom in which to journey. I've been struck this week as I've been getting ready for the Markan class that we've been teaching, which is coming up again on the 22nd, of how much absolute violence was present in the time of Jesus, both his childhood and his adult years in ministry, from 30 years old until he was crucified on a cross. He succumbed to the brutal violence of the Roman Empire. That many people experience day in and day out as just absolute repression, and other people, the privileged people, experienced as absolutely fantastic. It was great. And then tons of people are like, no, it's not great. Very similar to what we're facing today. Anyway, in doing some of the research for that, and I know these turn out backwards, so I'll read them to you, but one of the books that I'm reading that is linked to the Markan story of Jesus is called Jesus and the Spiral of Violence. And the subtitle is Popular Jewish Resistance in Roman Palestine. We know that the Jesus movement, this third way, wasn't taking place inside some sort of euphoria or in some sort of easy environment, but in the midst of a violent environment. The other one is called Jesus and Empire, the Kingdom of God and the New World Disorder. Let's see, where's it? I had another one. Oh, I thought this was an interesting one too that I've been reading. This one, the title of the book is called "Who Will Roll Away the Stone?" Who will roll away the stone? As if, we've hit this wall and we can't get through it. Who's going to roll away the stone so we can walk into a new day? Wow. Jesus chose the path, and we all have to choose our path. He chose a path of right through the middle of fight or flight to engaging in a nonviolent way with the community in which he found himself. And he sought a language like the kingdom of heaven rather than Roman Empire. He sought language that helped people begin to take their first steps into that third way, into another way of being together. And he did it all the way to the point where he got, he got crucified. So he got overwhelmed by the violence. And, in the gospel writers, they say even as he's hanging on a cross, he's still forgiving people. Right? He's saying, look, God, they don't know what they're doing here. So, forgive them. I mean, it's just amazing the capacity for nonviolent engagement, which is I think the heart of this thing is how to dial in the middle of this thing without going into fight or flight. All right, one more. If you're, I like the Buddha myself, and I love Zen Buddhism, and I think we should have a good long conversation so that Buddhism and Christianity and probably parts of Islam and indigenous, there's a, well, whatever, that's a story for another day. Anyway, the Buddha was another great figure, right? Grew up in a place of privilege and had every reason to stay in that place of privilege, but began to see off the edges, right, that there's a dis-ease in the land. And so the Buddha chooses not to ignore the dis-ease, not to seal himself off from it, but goes right into the middle of it and begins to dive into it deep enough that he can find a new path, an eightfold path, or whatever the path of Buddhism is. Finding this pathway by engaging with the pain of the day and not just staying as part of the privileged elite or one who benefits from the power structures of the day. He sets that aside and engages the cultural context in which he finds himself to find a new way. And through peaceful means, through a sense of wisdom and insight. This is basically what I wanted to talk about today. All of these people, all of these spiritual leaders, right? These people that we think of as our kind of spirit guides, they bring this kind of stoic, creative, grace-filled, open, steady kind of presence, and they don't allow themselves to be thrown up against the two brick walls of fight or flight. And I guess what I'm trying to help us think about today is how can we feed or nourish or practice that part of ourselves. And I would encourage you, and this is what I'm going to try to commit to too, to do that in kind of small ways before I get overwhelmed with circumstances that are going to just trigger me and I'm going to crawl in my hole and run away, or really I would abhor this, but to fight, get aggressive and move into it in a fight way, right? So I want to encourage us to say, look, now is the time to try on ways of being that are birthed out of this third way, and to try them on in the smallest of ways with the smallest of interactions, to build some sense of confidence that then begins to enable courage, so that when the issues get more complex, when I have to function as a role model for my children and my grandchildren, I'm able to exemplify this path, right? This possibility for people. So that's my word for today. Kind of somehow find your inner Moses or your inner Jesus, be your Buddha of nature, whatever it happens to be. But you spend some time, since you're not in this place and you're engaged mostly in this place, nurturing and fanning that flame so that it might be a guide along your way. Because as the waves of this roll over you over and over and over again, you're going to find that your name might be changing. Your identity might be shifting. Your existential reality might be moved, shaped, formed by the experience we're having. Call out your name along the way so we know where we are, and be present for that third way inside of yourself. Let me close by reading that poem again. And as I read this poem today one more time, I want you to focus in on your candle. And it's a perfect practice to have, right? You find this tangible object. Religions do this. Find a tangible object that is the objectification, right, of your inner self. And then you use that as a way to tend to that inner self, right? Um, when you light the candle, you say, I'm going to honor for this 30 minutes uh, that soul within me. And the candle becomes that soul. So I want you to use that candle as sort of a centering piece, or it could be some other symbol you have around the house. It could be a flower that you keep replacing that stays fresh and vibrant, connected to the water. It could be this, it could be that, whatever it happens to be. Um, let that thing kind of objectify or hold externally that which is going on internally for you. And I would remind us all that it's not just about you. Um, I really do think that we're both soul and we're collective soul at the same time. So the work you do, you know, it matters. It matters not just to you, but to the collective soul as well. Lake Song. Every day our name is changed. Say stones colliding into waves. Go and read our names on the shore, say waves colliding into stones. The birds overhead call their names to each other again and again to say where they are. So where have you been, my small bird? For I know our names will change one day. But before our shadows disappear into the starry blur, call out your name to say where we are. Call out your name to say where we are. All right, my friends. Thanks for spending some time together today, kind of living in between both worlds. Thanks for sharing some of your wisdom. I've been trying to read that as much as I can as I talk, but I love coming back to this and re-looking at it and kind of going through and kind of gathering the wisdom you bring to this journey and letting it flood into my inner life at some level. It gives me courage not to hold up in another Netflix series only, not to strike out in violent ways. Maybe they be physical violence or even verbal violence, or even thinking negatively about things. But trying to stay centered. This our hopefully your wisdom and my reflections as well, kind of are part of the waves that continue to roll over us, that give us a sense of new identity as we move together into the future. So, deep gratitude for that. All right, a couple of announcements. My announcement page is blown into the wind here. Here we go. Sorry about that. Not a ton. One, Martin is up on sabbatical and vacation, but left some songs for us to listen to. So today, I posted up one that I think fits with this theme. So listen to that and let that be a kind of meditative piece for you today. Also, a reminder that tonight at 11 o'clock is the end of your capacity to vote for both our budget and for all of our leadership for next year. So thanks to all of you who have already done that. We will launch all of our new leaders together, I think, this month on the 23rd. We'll have our first new council meeting. So that's awesome. Obviously, we've got plenty to think about as we move forward. And then finally, continue the Markan study, Say to This Mountain, which is a story about thinking about Mark's gospel in a way in which how do we move the mountains? How do we roll away the stone? How do we release ourselves from powers that might be causing us dis-ease individually and collectively so that we have capacity to enter the third way? Quite complex, of course, but that study will continue on the 22nd at 11:30 a.m. But as well, you can see in this week, we will record all those and post them up to YouTube. So if you just want to follow along via that mechanism, feel free to do that as well. Okay. All right, everybody. I think that's it for this week. I'm going to do a little backpacking this week myself with Lori and more dip into nature before Lori cranks back up to whatever the school system's going to be, which We really don't know. And I know I start cranking back up for how we're going to engage together in the fall. Just starting to work on some of that together with a lot of volunteers, of course. We'll figure out a way to balance